on to the district needs and budget and community board requests review for this will be the fiscal year of 2023. And thanks, Anya, for starting that live stream. Just a reminder to everyone that we are live streaming and this will be posted on our YouTube channel, so keep it clean. Also, if for some reason you have to leave, you have some emergent situation, just please text Anya at in the chat, because it's been not in this group, but in other meetings that I've attended, people tend to drop off as time goes on, and then we don't have a quorum, and then we can't make recommendations or have a vote. Thanks. So since this will mainly be led by the district manager, Sean Campbell, take it away.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm looking for my list. Well, I'll give, like I said, I want to give a little bit of background for, I don't know that we have many new members here on with this right now, but just a little context for what this is. Our budget priorities are submitted in tandem with our district needs statement. That is a mechanism that was set up by the Department of City Planning back in, I think, 2018, 2017. And that's when the Department of City Planning introduced a platform that we have to put all of our narrative, and then they have a drop down on the budget choices. And so there was some resistance from me and this board in terms of having it so prescribed by another agency, and by the fact that they sort of then wrested the product away from us. If you look online at the DCP report, it says the agency answered with the following. But we're the agency and it's our report. So I'm still working with, I still sort of pitch that when I talk to DCP, but I will say that they've been really good about expanding their support and offering additional resources. I just sat through another resource tutorial with them yesterday evening, and they are really good about that. But one of the concerns that we continue to express, and by we, I mean all of my colleagues and boards citywide, is that while we have had to put a lot more work and effort into it, there hasn't been a real meaningful shift in agency responses to our requests, and we'll get to that step later. But we submit these priorities. The agencies respond, and then we get to respond to their responses. And all of the requests are built on both our service delivery throughout the year, the community input that we heard at our public hearing before the October meeting, and then the budget consultations that I concluded with city agencies as of September 30th. The consultations were a little bit disappointing. I don't know if it's because we're continuing to do them online, but there were some exceptions. Department of Sanitation was attended by the commissioner, and then the Agency for Children's Services, Administration for Children's Services, also had a large group of administrators there, and HRA had the Deputy Commissioner Aaron Drinkwater there. So those were really fruitful conversations. Other agencies, such as Department of Buildings, had just and Department of Health and Mental Hygiene had just our liaisons that we deal with all the time, who are perfectly wonderful, smart, dedicated people who help us out on service delivery, but they're not the budget people, they're not the decision makers. So it was less fruitful conversations. We submit our budget agendas through the Office of Management and Budget weeks in advance, and then often they give us their responses days in advance at least. So anybody who comes to us and says, well, we're going to have to get back to you with that answer, isn't prepared for them. So that's something we're still working with OMB and the Department of City Planning on, to try to get more meaningful and impactful responses. But in the meantime, we're going to work off our list from last year. And we talked a little bit before the meeting got started, sort of casually, about having to rank our budget priorities, but it's a pretty loose ranking, and I do try to put some wording into the narrative that points out that these aren't hard rankings, that we're ranking them because the system asks us to, and as Glenn Woolen said a little bit earlier, they're impossible choices. They're like, what's more important, breathing or eating? So we'll continue to try to finesse that. But then without further ado, Anya, would you share the screen so that we're looking at the list as we talk through it? Is that helpful to everybody? And I'll try to remind you where it's useful, what the agency said to our response. But we're starting, I'm all turned around.
Does everyone see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we're starting with the capital budget requests. And our first one is reconstructing or upgrading a park or amenity. You know, we continue to be the last out of all 59 community boards in the city in terms of green space for people who live within a quarter mile of a park or playground. So until that changes, I think this should be a high up priority. There is a specific request for a track around the parade ground that will weave into the narrative. And in the district needs statement that we have a land use map, less than 3.6% of the land in our district is recreational use. And if you take out the parade ground, which can only be used, well, is primarily by permit, only 1%. So this is a request that the department always says, ask our elected officials for funding, which just demonstrates that Parks doesn't have their own capital budget. But we'll do that. And I think the ones we really need to focus on are UMA Park, because that's had no capital love in 15 or more years. And the Hotspot Tot Lot, which came through a community member's request. And also, I don't think has been touched since the early 90s was the last time when Howard Golden gave it a little bit of money. And then we'll refer to our 2017 green study that identified other places in the district that could be greened. Are there any questions or argument that this shouldn't be a high priority?
No, I don't think so. The only thing you have to just acknowledge the opening of the space across from Midwood as a new public space. I don't know. I just wondered if to at least say yes, thank you for that.
You mean the Colbert Park?
I don't even know what it's called. I mean, I live down the street from it, but I'm not even sure.
I'll look into that and see what that was. I mean, Colbert was only partially restored, so happy to say thanks. That was actually a David Greenfield member item before he moved out of city council, and it was a partial upgrade. But I'll look into that, Greg. And if it's something other than that, then
there's also Midwood Field.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
right at that location, which we received a few requests for, Midwood Field.
Okay. Okay, so the next one is similar. It's just upgrading ones that do exist. The first one is identifying new space, and the second one is upgrading the ones that do exist. The capital projects that are in play were presented to us at our most recent Community Environment Committee meeting in the spring. And that's, of course, the tennis center, the ball field 9, right on Caton, the Western Path in the parade ground, Huddy, and then, of course, the Cortellia Road Tot Lot, which was completed this year. Yeah, 1997 was the last time Campus Road Tot Lot got any funding. So moving on to to our plaza request. I mean, I think we should just keep hammering away at requests for Newkirk Plaza, and you'll see as we go through, we take 3 swipes at this. One through DOT, arguing that it really is under DOT's purview. Later on, we also asked the New York City Transit Authority to upgrade it, and there's even a request for EDC to let an RFP on it. So I'd like to keep this high. I think we might actually we might have a shot at it because this is something that the borough president's office got involved in a few years back, and then the mayor's office took the ball. And we thought they were going to run it in, but it stayed in limbo. But given the borough president's interest in it, if the borough president does move into City Hall and Ryan takes Ryan Lynch with him, I think it's really important to keep this amplified because those are people who are very involved with questioning why it wasn't in public purview. Any questions on that?
No questions. I just want to remind, if you're a call-in board member or guest, please mute yourself by hitting *6 or mute your phone because you're interrupting the conversation. Thanks.
Provide a new or existing elementary school. Our district has been recognized as a district in need for well over a decade. I might want to move this down in the priorities a little bit just because I don't know what the numbers are right now. I think COVID has changed some of the school numbers. We'll keep it in there. It is recognized by SCA. So this isn't a matter of trying to convince them that we need the space. And I'll double check those utilization numbers. They've gone down. I think PS 139 is at 107% of utilization. PS 217 is down from 125 to 110%. PS 315 is right at 100%. So it doesn't feel like as pressing a need, and it has been recognized by the agency as a need. Then there's the request for technology, which DOE said they didn't need, which was a weird response because I don't know that we've necessarily ensured that any family who's continuing to learn remotely or kids who will continue to do that are equipped. So we'll try to tease that out and keep that in there if it is recognized as a need. I'm just going to say, jump in. Instead of me pausing to look up and say, are there any questions? I think it's a well-mannered enough group that you can just jump in and interrupt at any time. And that way I can get through it more quickly. Is that okay, Joanne, everybody? Okay.
Well, then I'd like to jump in if I might. So
yeah, do that.
Why is it that all these numbers are down so much in the schools? And do you think that's going to remain that way as we hopefully pass through this COVID problem?
So I don't know. And it's been really hard to get that information from DOE. We do have a decrease in our population of residents under the age of 18. But I don't know to what extent that's impacting school attendance. And then sometimes, Glenn, I wonder if they just started counting things differently, in terms of space utilization, because it's formulaic. So I'll try to get that answer and just build that context into this. The high schools are the same. I mean, Murrow has never, from the time I've been aware of New York City public schools, which is like, I don't know, 20 years, Midwood has always been 165% utilization. Murrow is 115%. Brooklyn College Academy is 172% utilization. Erasmus is the only school I know where the utilization actually went down, but that's because they broke it up into 5 schools. So I'll try to get that answer to you.
And then Glenn and Sean, can you guys hear me?
Yes, Carl.
Gotcha. So I apologize. I'm on the call via audio, but I had to reboot my laptop because it froze. So I'm trying to see how that happens. But to the question about, attendance and enrollment, that's a political thing too. There was an article I saw in a local paper, I think last week, that basically said there was some sort of city council hearing recently where they brought in some of the top brass of the DOE to answer questions about attendance because there's various allegations from the head of the UFT and other groups that the DOE doesn't know the numbers because they're trying to hide things because, you know, the push to return to school is not looking good. And so, you know, Sean, you can try what you have on your end, and then, you know, we do have that education libraries meeting in about a week and a half or so, where I think Devontae can give an update, so we can ask some questions there. But I'm thinking, you know, it may be hard for you to get that answer just because that's an answer that City Hall is asking, City Council is asking for, and at least from the article I read, people didn't have an answer for them yet.
Okay, fair enough. I did pull these numbers out of the blue book, the school utilization report. So
Yes,
this would have preceded you know, the current count debate.
Yeah. It's a base, it's a start, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then I don't know, Carl, if you know anything about the technology for students and whether or not that really is still a need and we should keep it in or not.
That's, I mean, the official public stance was that, you know, when Chancellor Porter announced in July that schools would be 100% in person, then, you know, the public stance means, if you read between the lines, that would mean, so then does that mean iPads aren't being delivered to kids anymore? You know, I haven't heard any, I mean, you know, the DOE is big, and so I haven't heard anything publicly that says the DOE has reclaimed all those iPads or not, but that doesn't mean that they haven't. And so I think that's something to still keep on there because, you know, when Devontae comes, that's a question definitely to ask, right? Where it's like Chancellor Porter made this comment in July. Schools have been in session for about a month. And so does this mean that any kid who had an iPad over the past year and a half was required to return their iPad? And does this mean that there is no longer the ability to request devices for families who need them?
Yeah. Okay. We'll try to get more back to that, but leave it in the meantime.
Yep.
It can be broadly translated too. The next one, with EDC to build and expand incubator or affordable worker research lab space. The response from EDC was that that's not our job. So I think we might just take that out. I think incubator space always comes with like SBS and other, that incubator space can be more of an SBS request, and affordable work and research lab space. I think that just came out of COVID moments. And since EDC said it's not within our purview, we might take it out unless somebody thinks of it as a need that should be provided in the public realm and an agency to aim it at.
Well, I'd like us to consider perhaps how the Clayton Flax incubator is funded, and perhaps the narrative is changed to support the work being done there. It doesn't have to be at the same priority it is now, but it might behoove us to mention the work that they're doing there.
Okay, so I'll target it more for that and put it in as maybe a continuing funding source. And aim it to, I think it is still EDC because they're the one who's contracting with Urbane, and then also SBS as well.
Agreed, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I want to move NYPD renovate or upgrade existing precinct house back up. In the history of my involvement with this board, that's often been the #1 request. It's been on our list for 30 years, and we know that where it's stalled in the system right now is that OMB needs to approve a site search, and we've been told this for about a year. And so I kind of want to elevate this to, you know, top 2 or 3 and get pressure back on our elected officials to pressure OMB to approve the site search and just keep this on the radar. The last many of you know, that the last step they took was for NYPD Capital to do an exercise to determine whether or not they could rebuild a new precinct at the current location. And the answer was, sure, the lot size and zoning allows us to do that. However, the location of the precinct vis-a-vis the rest of the district and the traffic and parking issues that are here make that a not so viable option. And we joke because I think they spent $1 million plus coming up with that answer, and we could have given it to them for 5. But so I would like to move that back up and highlight it a little bit better. It seemed less urgent in the face of COVID when we knew we were in a budget, tailspin, and there wasn't any capital project moving forward. But happy to hear some feedback on that.
I'd like to see it moved up. It's a real problem.
I just had a question. Has there ever been a site that has been selected or at least targeted?
Yes, there has. They were going to build the new precinct and actually had allocated big funds to move the precinct over to Avenue H and Ocean Avenue. And it was, right by alongside the tracks. That fell through. I mean, it was like all systems go. And then it fell through, I think, after 9/11, when all big capital projects were put on hold because of the budget crisis that followed the 9/11 disaster. And then it just fell apart after that. They just didn't get it back on track. That land was sold to a private developer. It's now residential, developed and fully occupied. So that's how they lost that space.
I see, and nothing since, I imagine.
Yeah. And
Okay.
you know better than a lot of people, Greg, that identifying a location in the district is hard because we just don't have developable spaces. But
Right.
but it's hard isn't impossible, and the only way you get to impossible is by not even looking.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Another one that I want to move up, because some of you might remember our transportation committee meeting with Jonine Kidder, who's like one of the brilliant people at DOT. We've got a number of road bridges in the community that are moving forward for partial and component rehabs. So the Parkside Bridge that construction is supposed to start in FY24. Beverly Road is supposed to start in FY25. And then component work will occur on the 18th Avenue, the East 14th Street, and the Nostrand Avenue road bridges, all the way from FY22 to FY26. One of the more sort of jarring facts about road bridges is that the Newkirk Avenue road bridge has been recognized by DOT as a bridge in need of component work, but it can't be put onto a component contract because the ownership issues or the purview issues surrounding Newkirk Plaza complicate DOT's issues on the road bridge to which the plaza is attached. So it's become sort of Kafkaesque, right? They've recognized that big pipe that comes out on the north end of Newkirk Avenue sometimes carries current. So coordinating it with MTA, DOT, and the agency issues surrounding Newkirk Plaza has disqualified it from becoming a component contract. So they're going to try to roll it into its own standalone contract. And I think we have to push for it, partly because that bridge needs attention, and partly because it gives us another way of highlighting the impacts of the city's inability to identify ownership, so to speak, of the plaza. And I think we'll move it up to support the funding that exists for some of the bridges, and I'll name them all by name. Any questions? The other thing that's wrapped into that part of the narrative is trench restoration. So trench restorations are, the trenches are DEP, like where the waterworks are in the roadway. In years, I think in the 80s, DEP did a lot of trench work, but then they backfilled the trenches with not very good material. So where you see those depressions in the roadway that seem to go from manhole cover to manhole cover, that's a trench. DEP stopped fixing them, and then DEP and DOT started doing this whenever there was a road condition, and DOT started throwing asphalt over them, which of course, if something's sinking and then you put something heavy on it, it sinks more. But so DOT took trench restoration back away from DEP, came up with $60 million about 3 or 4 fiscal years ago. None of the ones in our district were identified, and DOT hasn't come up with any more money to move forward. And my understanding from our budget consultation with them is none of those projects have even moved forward. So maybe with new administration and new elected officials in certain seats, we can bring the trench restoration locations in our district to the attention of the elected officials and try to get some of our trenches addressed, so it's not just a road repair after road repair.
Is it possible that all of the flooding that we recently had, from Henri and Ida and all, that they're going to start having to do any kind of reno in the areas under the trenches, and maybe they could sort of combine it?
Maybe that's a really good question. And Barton, we're trying to get together a community environment committee meeting for November to bring DEP in to explain sort of the water infrastructure. I mean, some of the infrastructure, the idea that we're going to take the 12-inch pipes and replace them with 15 or 18, like that can't happen because it's too big. It's the entire borough, or the network is too big, and they become billion-dollar jobs, not multi-million-dollar jobs. But to the extent where they are upgrading equipment, that might be a way to sort of, like piggyback, just the way like they don't put catch basins in unless there's a major capital project. Like the restoration of Church Avenue, they could add catch basins because they were restoring Church Avenue, but it wasn't about the catch basins. They could just piggyback that on.
Yeah, so that was basically my thought. You're exactly on target with that. So great.
But no, good. That's great. That's a great thought to bring into it. And I will ask them and see if there's a better way to position the ask.
And definitely bringing them in November or December, whatever, I think is the way to do it, to try to get somebody in who has some knowledge of it and some ability to make decisions and answer questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Got
Well,
it.
follow up with you on that for sure.
Sure. Thanks.
Just quickly, Sean, if I may.
course.
And this is only for most of us, I think, on the board know what they are, but considering that the audience that may be watching this afterwards, they may not know what it is. You explained what a trench was, but you didn't explain what a road bridge was.
Oh, so it's the road bridge. Thank you, Dwayne. The road bridges are just the roadway that cars drive over mostly in our case, it's over the Brighton line and over the LIRR. So underneath the road is is transit. Do we have any road bridges that go? No, all of our road bridges are just roadways at the ground level. And there's subway or train underneath them, either the Brighton line or the Anacostia Railroad. So thanks for that. I'm trying to think of places where there's a road bridge that goes up. Like I think Flatbush the very, 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 very end of Coney Island Avenue. Coney Island Avenue goes up and becomes a road bridge because it goes over.
Highway. Yeah.
Road bridges are also, we also have train bridges where our trains are higher than the roadway. But that's a different story, and that's a different issue. Where are we? Thanks. We're at FD&Y, rehabilitate or renovate existing firehouses, EMS stations. I mean, that's sort of a throwaway. We ask for that just so that our firehouses know that we're there with them. We don't have a single generator in the district. So I'd like to keep that on, but FDNY just has a sort of a work order system, and they go in order of which firehouses score, you know, on their work order system. So this isn't a matter of advocating and asking for your firehouses to be nicer. FDNY just has its own system for doing that. So unless somebody thinks we should just take it off, I'll keep it on as a placeholder. And keep the generator on, but I don't know about prioritizing it very high because we don't have a specific house with a specific need. I'll put FDNY under transit and keep the Church Avenue station on. It is a station that people ask for upgrades pretty frequently. And we know that it hasn't gotten any capital love in a very, very long time. And it's a pretty depressing looking station. And it's highly, highly utilized. So I'll keep that on and add a line about accessibility there. Is there any question or comment about that, doing that? Okay.
No, but I would like to make a comment about the generator.
Mm-hmm.
So far, the worst thing we've experienced in a very, very long time has been Sandy. But a major hurricane that could bring the power outages much closer to our door. In which case, having at least one firehouse with a generator might become really, really important. That's it. I'm done. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I'll emphasize it. I mean, also, Glenn, I'll add in that we are high ground in Brooklyn, are we not?
Well, that's a relative term. A Category 3 hurricane can bring the storm surge up to Cortelyou Road in some places. So, I mean, it's not like a wall of water there, but if the streets are full of water, the basements are full of water, and the power could be out right up to Cortelyou Road. And I don't know whether that would necessarily affect our firehouse on Cortelyou, but it would be nice to have at least one in the district with a generator so we know we have access to the fire department.
Yeah, okay. I'll keep it on there. I know some of the pushback from them is that, or the reason why we weren't higher up on their priority list has to do with wiring too, that it might in some cases necessitate an electrical upgrade. So it becomes more expensive at some firehouses than others, depending on their capacity for it. But I'll work with them on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kind of have trenches in a couple different places. So we're back to DOT roadway maintenance. And here are our specific trenches. I jumped the gun a little bit on that, but here are specific locations, the same locations that they've been since we put this list together. I'm not sure that we have any new ones that have come to our attention, but these are you might recognize these locations depending on where you live. And then I guess I'm wondering if we should keep the improving accessibility specifically at this 18th Avenue stop on the Culver line. That is a request that was brought to our attention at a public hearing a few years ago by an advocacy group that came over from what was then the United Cerebral Palsy House on Lawrence Avenue and is now Adapt Community Network. But it came to us a few years ago. We haven't heard from them since. I mean, them being the advocates for it, but it certainly wasn't granted. So we could keep it on there.
Is there any way we can tie in the text amendment for accessibility here? Just add some language and remind them that they have gone through the process of changing the zoning text. So perhaps they can remember this when development occurs in the area.
Got it. Noted. I'll do that. Yeah, maybe if we move the precinct house, then somebody will want to develop that land and then they'll be tied to the text amendment. We could take care of so many things by moving the precinct house. in the meantime, to the extent that it is still there, it's a pretty rickety building and it's been scaffolded for forever. And so I don't know, these might have to be moved down to expense. I don't know if these are capital requests or not, but usually I get, before this gets submitted, the list of work orders from the admin staff at the precinct in order to identify work orders that are outstanding and what it is that they're waiting to be fixed. So I'll update that accordingly. Surveillance cameras, that's something that we used to get a lot of community requests for. I haven't heard from the community in a long time on them. I can keep it. Oh, that should be 14, not 4. I can keep it or move it, depending on how people feel about it here.
Do you think that surveillance cameras are separate than red light cameras, for example?
In this case, it was meant to be. I think that the surveillance probably isn't the best. I should have named them. This was back in the day, people would ask for the Argus cameras. And that it was before there were so many red light and speeding cameras.
If I might go back just a smidgen, in terms of upgrading the precinct house, relocating it, all of that, which I think is really important. But you do have somewhere in here how well our precinct house is doing in reducing crime year over year, which is a wonderful thing, but it might be a little counterproductive in terms of motivating people to allocate the money for a new precinct house. I mean, if we're doing so well, why do we need something else? You know?
Okay.
Well,
Okay,
I mean, if
I'll
I
frame
may,
it better.
that argument is a little different. I'm sorry to cut you off, Sean, but like Glenn, the precinct itself, the officers are doing well, but the precinct house, the physical structure, is what's problematic. At least that's how I understand it when I'm reading through
The
it.
location as well as the physical structure, because they've determined they could build a new physical structure. It's just not a good place to put it because it really should be in the middle of the district and have adequate access for the vehicles and so forth. And there are a lot of really important reasons why something should be done about this. But if you tell people that, well, I understand it's falling apart around you, but you're doing a great job. We don't really need to do anything about it because you're doing a great job. And there are other precincts that maybe aren't doing a great job. Maybe their crime statistics are going up instead of down. So anyway, that was just my thought.
Well, I can leave it in the narrative so that we're acknowledging the good work being done, but keep it out of I'll frame the actual request so that it's more narrowly focused on what the need is. But keep both of them there.
Thank you.
And then going back to the cameras, I could expand this so that it's Argus and traffic enforcement cameras, because we certainly do get requests for traffic enforcement cameras. We get very specific requests about which way they should point and all sorts of things like that. So does that make more sense?
I want to say
To me, it does, because I mean, I can stand on any particular corner at any time of day and I'll watch 3 people run a red light, and it is just really bad in the north of the district. I almost got creamed at 6 o'clock in the morning the other day. It's basically I've been saying this over and over again. There's no rules right now, just 5s. It's just a lot. And I just want to say, Steve, we're all just chiming in as we have questions, so no need to raise your hand. So, just shoot.
So I was just going to say something about the cameras. My understanding is that the speed cameras and red light cameras there's something about how they work that they just catch that instant image, like snap, snap, when certain things trigger them. And so they'll get the vehicle and the license plate. But surveillance cameras, obviously, they can see that and have seen that. And I'm aware of other incidences where, say, people have been, hit by trucks, cars, whatever it is, and the actual scene, leading to the crash or whatever it was caught on camera by a surveillance camera. It's not caught by these traffic cameras.
I'm not suggesting that we remove surveillance cameras. We're adding traffic cameras.
Right, right. So I'm just pointing out, though, in terms of functionality, and obviously surveillance cameras can catch other kinds of things. I know that there have been on the Ditmas Park chat, there's been a lot of concern. Now, I can't remember which subway station it was. I think it's Cortellia Road, where there've been a lot of issues. People getting mugged and stuff, and I don't know if there's people inside and out. You know, so those are the kinds of things anyway that surveillance cameras are going to pick up on.
Yeah, and just to, actually, there's another distinction to be made is I believe DOT makes the recommendation or approves red light and speeding cameras, and NYPD approves the Argus surveillance cameras, which are used both as a deterrent when they post them because they're pretty visible, as well as a tool for apprehending people who've engaged in criminal activity. So I'll set it up so that they're pointing those requests are pointing in the right direction. And the subway station should have their own cameras. That should be funded through transit. So I'll take a look at that with the Cortellia Road concern. This other one was, I think, the School Construction Authority to renovate site components was a request because we get a lot of complaints about how schools dispose of their garbage. And so there is a request that SCA make sure that there be storage within the school grounds. And at the consultation, I was told that SCA does build this into new builds, but there are no plans, there's no budget and no plans to budget for retrofitting old schools. So I don't know whether leaving it on hurts or helps or doesn't matter either way. Also, School Construction Authority is not, you know, when we do these budget consultations, we've added different entities that we speak to. And School Construction Authority and DOEs just started talking to us a few years ago. They're actually not within the cabinet. So School Construction Authority is an authority. It's not a city agency. So its funding works a little bit differently. I'll keep it there as a placeholder for now. If there's additional budget requests that come out of our next hearing and I need to move it out, I'll do that. But I don't mind sort of emphasizing that we still have a problem with school garbage.
Sean, can I ask, this is Nikki, can I ask a
Nikki.
question just a little bit? Hello, good evening, everybody. Can I ask a little bit of a broader question about like strategy when you prepare this document, just based on your experience? Sorry, okay, go down. Like generally speaking, do you find that it's better to make like, you know, in the left-hand column, you have the agency that you're making the request of. Do you find that it's better to go narrow with requests and say like, okay, we're really just going to ask one thing of this particular body of the city, or is it better to just be like everything we can ask for we should ask for? Do you have any particular wisdom to share on that?
I mean, the agencies we don't get a lot of I was talking about this a little earlier, we don't get real quality feedback from the agency, and it doesn't matter necessarily how we pose the question. I mean, I'm looking, you know, when it is too broad, it gives the agency the opportunity to say, this request includes more than one proposal, funding for part is recommended. And then I have to call the agency to figure out what part of it is recommended. But it's not as though they're going to say, well, we would have funded that if she had asked for it in a better way, or we weren't going to fund that, but since they had such a laser targeted request, you know what I mean? I don't think, we're just not getting good feedback from the agency. So I don't know. I think it's a matter of, we keep it broad when we're trying to just keep a whole lot. I don't want to use 7 different priorities or 7 different asks to delineate every park. I don't want to ask for every park individually and then take up that many priorities with parks. I'd rather put it into a big lump and say, we need the parks rehabilitated, and let DPR say, well, you know, there's more than one thing in this request. So I think it sort of depends on the agency and why I'm lumping it together. But I do think it's worth me kind of taking a step back and thinking about each one of these and whether or not anything should be drawn out or underscored in order to really emphasize it for the agency.
Thank you. That's really helpful because I think when you're asking us for feedback, that's sort of the first thing that comes to my mind is like, what generally works? And if we step back to the previous items we were discussing, just to give an example there, I was like, well, we have 2 requests that both sort of go to the NYPD. So should we only ask one if we really want to get that one thing done, or is that not a great strategy? But it's very helpful to know that just generally speaking, you don't get that kind of feedback from the agencies, and that also their reaction to these requests is very specific to the agency in particular. So thank you.
Yeah, no, and you know what, the other thing, I'll try to highlight the agency response to these as we go through them more. I'll tell you, there's a couple of ones that make me mad when an agency says this isn't recommended for funding. Oh, here's a good one. The trenches. So the trench restoration, the agency response was a section of the requested locations are included in a project in DOT's 10-year capital plan, which wasn't true for our district. For the remaining locations, we recommend this project be brought to the attention of your elected officials. Now, there's absolutely no reason why an elected official should take a member item to fund repairing a roadway. I only barely accept that this is an okay way to fund local parks, you know, as an elected official sort of vanity project, but for the city to give money to an elected official to just give it back to a city agency isn't very efficient. And the elected officials aren't apt to do it because with term limits, by the time they funded a capital project, the capital project gets bid out and then it gets completed. They're not even serving in the city council for the ribbon cutting, so they don't have the incentive. And again, it's like, I kind of get why an elected official is going to fund a park rehab, but telling us to ask our elected officials to fund trench restorations is, Barden kind of, you know, we had this conversation last year too. And I remember Barden telling me I couldn't be as cheeky about my response. So I tried to professionalize it, but it's just preposterous. It's preposterous. It's a preposterous idea that we're going to ask for that. So
besides, amongst
you
us,
got
I
me
love the
started.
cheekiness, needless to say, because I've seen you get red in the face at meetings, and just reading the sort of insensitive and unthoughtful responses that so many of our requests get, you just, as you said earlier, Kafka-esque.
Yeah.
But one quick question just to follow up is, in your chats with other DMs and board chairs, is it pretty much universally that we're all getting dissed by the agencies in these responses, or do they just hate us in particular?
No. It's universal, and it's I could share a study that I just read that was done by I think Independent Budget Office about the lack of response that community boards get in this process. And I did a little study. I think it was this time last year. It was sort of, you know, our first COVID year working from home, and I was sort of frustrated putting, you know, reprioritizing these in the I don't know, in the face of COVID. So I looked through the entire register and just nerded out for a couple of days, collecting the answers and just enumerating how many times they said further study by the agency is needed. What are the other pat answers? Bring this to the attention of your elected officials. This request, I'm sorry,
Not be accommodated within our
that's
current.
my other favorite one. More information is needed from the community board for making a funding decision. But we got that on our chronic flooding locations. you know, so you don't need more information. We've been bringing East 10th and Church Avenue to your attention for 7 years. So I did that and figured out that about 30% of our requests get an answer that isn't just a pat drop down answer. And usually that is because it's already funded. And we have done that. We've put in things when we know it's being funded, we put it in just to show support for the project moving forward.
Got it. Thank you. That's very, very impressive nerd spent time.
Thanks.
Can we go up to item 13, the NYPD precinct houses? Did
Yeah.
you say that you were going to move this to expenses? I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying there.
I'm not, so I'm keeping the build a whole brand new precinct house somewhere else as a capital request. But I'm moving the fix the one we've got to expense because I don't think any of these are capital investment. Fixing the leaks, repairing the lockers, those sort of work orders things, I think are just fixer-upper items and aren't capital.
Okay. I think it should be, I don't know, I guess I haven't seen the other ones, but I would think it should be pretty high up. I don't know. It's higher than 13 out of 15. It strikes me. If it were in this list, I would say move it up. So I just want to flag that I think it should be a little higher than it is on the expense side.
Okay, I'll note that. I think I hesitated a little bit because asking for a capital investment in a precinct house that we really want them to move out of took the emphasis off of moving it. But it's certainly, because it's been scaffolded for so long, I think some of those, we are happy to prioritize those higher and figure out what actually needs to be done and whether or not it falls into capital or not, and then put it up high accordingly. There are a couple things. CS means something like, oh, continued support. So these are things that have been funded and we just keep them on our list for continued support because until the projects are complete. I think the sanitation garage, the heating and cooling system, I think was just installed in September. I was told that they had a crane over there lifting it onto the roof, which is scary because the roof also needs to be fixed. So we can also get them hard hats, but I'll figure out if that project's been complete and maybe just change it to a new roof. This brings us to the expense budget priorities. And again, you know, prioritizing these things it's not right. It's not right that we should be asked to do this. So the priorities kind of, I don't know, I'm willing to shuffle them around. And it does say in the narrative of the district needs statement in several places that prioritizing things that are interrelated is folly. So I'll continue to say that, but in the meantime, let me know if any of this looks really out of place to you. We did make the leap to put ourselves first, because if we're not considering increasing the baseline for community board's budget, the highest priority on the expense budget priority, you know, who's gonna love us more than we love ourselves. So I would like the board's support in keeping that up high. I'll say that community boards have not been meaningfully expanded in 27 years. The New York City head count reached an all-time high in 2019 with 326,000 city workers, but the number of community board staff that, you know, citywide increased by 5 people. So, you know, we're not, and, you know, there's a lot of agencies that got huge, huge, I mean, significant, substantial increases, DOT, DOB, DOHMH over the past, I'm not just talking about COVID, but even before that, these HRA had a huge expansion in their budget and community boards didn't. So when COVID affected the city budget and all city agencies were asked to do a PEG reduction, this is something that in the past community boards, we never got an increase, but we were held harmless from decreases, and that didn't happen this time. So that reduction took place in the last fiscal year. It was restored in this fiscal year, but we actually had to reduce from other agencies had to reduce from increases, and we had to reduce from a really flat baseline. I think I'm preaching to the choir. I'm just this is just something that's important though, and I've been talking to a lot of other district managers about it lately.
I'm fully in support of keeping it number one, especially if we want to continue and expand our program of doing community outreach, for example, land use, having town halls about some of the bigger projects that are going to be coming down the line, including the Sears building and the former PS 90 site, which is has the remains of an African burial ground. So all of those initiatives that we want to do and roundtables and public forums are going to cost money. So that's my spiel.
I like it. And I'll enumerate some of those other projects. Also our Youth Leadership Council, trying to keep that going and getting it off the ground in a more meaningful way. The public health issue request moved way up last year for obvious reasons. But to Nikki's point, it's not a real specific ask. And actually the agency response to that was, this is not in the city's budget jurisdiction, which maybe they didn't read it closely. I don't know. We did have Anne Godette can't be here this evening, but she did send a memo with some thoughts, and one of them was to add food pantries to the budget request. So I'll figure out exactly where that goes. But I think I'm going to just kind of take this out, tease out what we really meant by some of this, and put it in the proper spots as we move on. Unless somebody thinks there's something of value in the sort of general request.
What about, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think your approach is good to parse it out, add some additional detail, and then redistribute it. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
I mean, the only other thing that came to mind looking at it is, regarding vaccination. I mean, I think this is happening a lot anyway, but just publicizing, vaccines, especially when hopefully soon the vaccines will be available for children under 12. So just making sure that our numbers are strong in that regard.
All right, good. That's helpful. I'll kind of frame this around ongoing, post-COVID or coming out of COVID time needs, including support for food pantry, vac sites, messaging and education, and maybe work in some support for the translation services that they're trying to get out there.
Are there any statistics that indicate that CD14 has suffered disproportionately from any COVID-related issues? Like maybe our vaccination rates or access to hospital care, anything that, really sort of cries out as something that's specific to us.
Yeah, we certainly have a low hospital bed to population ratio, and we certainly had high, in portions of the district, really high infection rate. And I will look into vax rates. I think that there's some portions where we're lower than the citywide average. So I'll parse it out with that too. Stats, facts, stats, and
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, Glenn, you were going to say something? Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, no, just a kind of a general observation, but since we get such poor responses to most, if not all, of these requests. Maybe it makes sense to think more in terms of narrowing it down. So, for example, if you pick an area where there's actually 5 things that need improvement in some way, nevertheless, maybe if we just ask for 1 or 2, they're more likely to consider it. I don't know if that's true, but it just seems to make some sense. And then the generalized statements, like the one we're looking at now, although it is true, doesn't really seem to push the right kind of buttons to get any action. So I would drop those kind of things altogether.
Okay, I'll move some of this up into the narrative and then see what's on the drop-down menu from DCP to figure out how to specify what the request is if it's pertinent to the district. But I got you. This was too broad and it didn't elicit any sort of answer or support.
And even in a lot of the other requests, I'm just, as I'm listening and thinking about this, I'm just wondering, when these agencies look at this, and it's not just, of course, our community board, there's lots of them, and there's lists of, everyone's got lists of 5 or 8 or 10 things that they want something done about. Maybe, if it was me and I find when they just ask one thing, I could actually check that off. I've done something. Whereas if I'm trying to do 5 things and I can't do 5 things, I may just push it off to the side.
Glenn, I don't think this is the place to zero in on anything, though, because this is a charter mandated exercise that we have to go through. And the reason why there's so many requests is it's linked into the district needs statement in the DCP platform. And so you have to, and the budget consultations that we do with all agencies. That's why it's this long list. It's part of the budget process. But to your point, I think that we have really pulled out some of the more urgent requests, and we have made, to have this document backing up that it's, been in our budget request for X number of years, I think is useful. But to highlight it and bring it into, to spotlight it really, that's sort of where the committees can kind of glom onto what the priorities are that are pertinent to the committees and figure out which of these the committees want to champion. And I think while obviously it hasn't come to fruition, we have had meaningful engagement on relocating the 70th precinct house. So I think maybe in committee is where we can figure out what we're gonna highlight as a need.
Yeah, I like that idea. Thank you.
Okay.
And then, Sean, question for you. Actually, like some quick things. So, like when you said you're going to tease out some of that information regarding the vaccination rates and cases and whatnot, I know there was a website, I think it's a city website, where, you can put in your zip code and then it gives you a comparison of, your vaccination rates, and then I think like maybe mortality and something else compared to, I think, the borough and the city. I'm still rebooting, and so unfortunately I can't pull the link up, but I know I had found that before.
Yeah,
and then
you can forward it to me. I get a little
Sure.
bit, zip codes aren't that helpful because you don't know where the tilt is, and
Precisely.
but if we can drill
Precisely.
down on it by either with census data or they report it at the CD level, I can look at it.
Yeah, I'll find that link and I'll share it with you. Yeah, I agree with you that the zip code, it doesn't give you deeper, but it could be a start. And then the second thing too, I hear Glenn's point about having a more refined focus, and at the same time, I hear the frustration that you said you and the other DMs feel about the city not engaging with you. And so maybe this is the wrong place, but I'm wondering, what leverage could several district managers have to basically say, hey, like this is a charter mandated process, and we do the work, and then we get boilerplate responses that don't show us that you are meeting us, right? Like, because I hear Glenn's point, and it's just that the power and I hear where he's coming from. It's just that it feels like it stresses an already uneven relationship where it's just the charter mandates that community boards say what their challenges are. And then over the past few years, you've had to be even more focused on that. And then you still get we'll get back to you maybe.
Yeah, I'm engaged with some of my colleagues, working on a report about community boards. And this is one of the main one of the focus. And we're working with OMB too, because they should be demanding better responses from the agencies. But it's a work in progress, and there's a couple of boards that have dropped out, updating their district needs statement. But I do want to say that, the agency responses could and should be better. It's the whole point. But I still feel like it's a really good exercise to go through and look at our district through this lens and then work through it as we are right now with board members, just to, kind of refocus and think about what you all are volunteering your time to be board members. And so I really kind of think of it as a valuable exercise to look at our district through this lens. Go ahead, Nina.
Yeah. Whoop, I'm unmuted. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the thing of, addressing the coronavirus and the needs there, and I think that is very true. Things were very confusing and not well managed. But I'm wondering, from a public health standpoint, if in fact it's too narrow. I mean, we're going to put this through now. We don't know where we're going to be a year from now. It may be better. It may be worse. It may be the same. But I think, my sense is that there needs to be more information available and in multiple languages, not only addressing COVID, but addressing access to care for those who aren't insured for, say, screening, like pap smears, mammograms, other kinds of screenings. And so my inclination is to feel that this should actually be expanded so that, otherwise I think they're going to say, oh, well, COVID's like a done deal. We have the vaccine now, goodbye. And that's the end.
Okay, I might be able to, I'll look at the platform and see if there's more than one thing to choose under the rubric of public health and multi-language and, full health outreach efforts, with an emphasis on translation and multiple languages and different ways of reaching into diverse communities. So I'll definitely frame that and add that in there.
Sean, 'cause I know we have to move on, but just quickly, to the point of public health, if we could just add in there, COVID testing. But I also want to mention that the language proficiencies are there. We just have to be, I'll send you the link where all that information is. I think we just have to get better as a board to help push some of that information out. And unfortunately, I'll send you also the link to the data that Carl was mentioning. It does not get broken down by community board district or community district. It is specifically in the city, which I think is problematic. It's done by zip code.
Yeah.
So I'll send the board those links separately.
If you can drop them in the
Sean?
chat.
Okay, no problem.
Sean,
Yes.
as a matter of public health, is mental health being considered as well as?
There are a few different items as we move through this that identify mental health needs in the community for sure.
Oh, okay.
So can we move on and we can talk about it when we get there?
Oh, sure.
Okay. It's sort of okay. We're going to transition into sanitation, which you all might know was originally founded as a public health agency. That's why they have the medical staff on as their symbol. You might remember that MLP, Manual Litter Patrol, was completely slashed from the budget during COVID. Here, Barden, I think I have, oh no, it's not in this part of the narrative. It's at some point in the narrative, I said, who thought it was a good idea to let our communities be dirtier during a pandemic? But we still don't have Manual Litter Patrol restored. And the only way we have any of it in the district is through council member items. So Matthew Eugene allocated a lot of funding to BK14, and they're using it for litter patrol. And the 48th council district, which is the smallest little nugget of our district, also has MLP, which even though it's a small part of our district, it does take care of some of the train trestles, like underneath them where a lot of things get dumped. So it's a useful grant, but manual litter patrol should not be grant funded. That is a baseline sanitation service. So I'm going to keep this as a really high, maybe make it a second priority, that MLP. We also, as you know, have 54 dead ends in the district, and that's how you have to clean them. Manual litter patrol is exactly what it sounds like. You know, they manually get off the trucks and they clean and pick up garbage off the streets. It's not done by a truck. It's done by people, and we really need it in this district.
Sean,
Yep,
may I ask another question?
of course.
So is it Manuel that is responsible for over there by Foster where people use this as a bathroom?
Well, I don't know. It depends. I think you might be talking about a lot.
It is a pathway where they have that gray. It's over there. It's like a little. I don't know what you call it, but it's like the bridge over the train tracks and by the sidewalk where pedestrians should walk.
Yeah, that's
because
actually Department of Transportation's purview.
Okay, because that is filthy. People use that as a
By the bus
bathroom.
stop?
Yeah, so it's like you have to walk out in the street rather than there because you can hardly find space to walk.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it could be manual litter patrol, but either way, we'll look into what agency can address it. But yeah, that would be something that if they have to actually get off the truck and sweep with brooms and stuff like that, that's MLP, and we need it in this district, and we need it in every city council member's pocket of the district. And it should be baseline sanitation. And that kind of goes along with providing more frequent litter basket collection. This actually did get restored. It was cut drastically and then put back a certain number of days a week. And then again is supported by city council member funding. But we should have 6-day-a-week basket service just baselined into the budget. We just should. It's not extra fancy sanitation stuff. It's regular sanitation.
Yeah.
Do I call one of their famous lines was, if we put more garbage cans out, it's going to collect more garbage?
No, I say that though too, Barden. I mean, it's counterintuitive, but sometimes some of the locations attract illegal drop-offs. And
Right,
illegal
well-
drop-offs and illegal dumping is hugely on the rise as a complaint in this district, and it came up at our budget consultation. And so we're going to ask for increased enforcement on that. But it's also true that the more often you're emptying out a basket, even if somebody takes their household and illegally puts their household in it, if it's getting emptied frequently enough, then it's not really going to cause as much damage as, only picking up baskets twice a week on commercial strips. That's just ludicrous.
Do I recall that actually they loosened the regs that mandated that you have to have a sanitation officer on site to ticket for the illegal dumping? That now it can be done on the basis of photos, etc.
Yeah, and that was discussed, and so that's gonna help them out a lot.
Thanks.
Yep. The next one is programs for housing inspections to correct housing code violations. So this, Nikki, is another one of those answers that agencies give us a lot. They say the agency will accommodate this issue within existing resources. And that's sort of frustrating because it's like, but we want more. What we're getting with the existing resources isn't enough. We want you to have more resources so you can do more of this. I don't know if you've all taken a look at the statistics in there, but it's terrible. We rank 12th out of 59 in terms of the number of housing code violations per 1,000 residents. You know, when we talk about adding new affordable housing to this district, we want to support that, but heck, not if they're all going to be in disrepair with serious housing code violations within the next X number of years. And then, of course, sustaining adequate affordable housing is another way to you decrease housing when you're not maintaining it, you know, and it can't be lived in. So I think this is a really important one, and I think that I think that HPD could use more inspectors. They could use a higher head count on this.
They could also use a different process in which they inspect, because they do not coordinate with the tenant when they inspect. They just show up and expect someone to be there at 10 o'clock in the morning. However, not part of this process, but that's my opinion.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, and then when we get calls like that, we've been able to try to facilitate more communication and work that out. And there's some inspectors that are better than others about reaching out beforehand, but we could add that in there. It's not as bad as Department of Buildings process, which we'll get to in a minute. Anything else on that?
Yeah, is the primary problem that there aren't enough inspectors picking up the violations, or that the landlords aren't correcting the violations once found, or both?
Well, I think if you look at the statistic, we wouldn't know how many violations there were if the inspectors weren't out there violating. So it is probably the teeth in the enforcement that you know, that
It seems
things are
like to
getting
me
fixed.
that if you know that only 40% are essentially compliant, that's 60% that are not, and why
Right.
not? And maybe the real problem here or solution isn't more inspectors, but somehow adding teeth to the violations that they're giving out. And I don't know how one would put that into this, but people should be fixing things when they're broken. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, no, I made it, that's good, Glenn. I made a note of it to figure out what the funding mechanism is for fixing. You know, if it's a certain point that the city moves in and does the Anya probably knows this better than I. At a certain point, the city will go in, they'll do the repair, and then they'll charge the landlord after they give up on the landlord taking care of it. So I can figure out what the mechanism that switches it from the landlord's onus to the city's onus is, and maybe fund more fix-it programs. Expanding street outreach. Here's another sort of tricky one where we're sort of identifying if we expand more street outreach for a homeless population, that sort of suggests that our homeless population isn't interacting with street outreach. And we know our most chronic locations, breaking ground is out there every day, sometimes twice a day. So at the junction, at Newkirk, at East 18th and Church. So it isn't a problem with outreach, it's a problem with accepting services. Yet I don't really know how to emphasize that what we have isn't adequate. It isn't addressing the problem and isn't enough and I feel like we're getting more. I was told that the street census isn't increasing, but certainly anecdotally, and it looks to me like it is. But I want to keep that in there as a request and maybe just fine tune what it is we're asking for. It isn't that there isn't enough outreach, it's that the outreach just isn't effective enough, and whether or not the programs on the other end of the outreach are attractive enough to get people to agree to come off the street.
Yeah, that's exactly the issue, is that the other end, once the services are accepted, I don't think that the services are sufficient. There also needs to be a bridge between being homeless and accepting services. There has to be a mediation. There has to be some midway. And we talked a lot about, you know, some solutions or temporary solutions to improve the quality of life of living on the street, which in turn will improve the quality of life of people who are living with people who are experiencing homelessness.
Okay, I'll try to get some direction from Casey on that. The other thing I'm going to add in, and this is at the agency's, and yeah, Steve, I'll update it. It used to be Common Ground, and then they changed it to Breaking Ground, and I didn't keep up with the lingo in the narrative last year. But we have been asked to focus on advocating for additional resources for people who are undocumented and for people who are mobility impaired, because even when people who are mobility impaired have agreed to come into shelter, some of the spaces aren't handicap accessible, and so they can't bring them in. And then, and then it takes another 10 tries to do it again. So I'll add that as per the agency's request. Same with the rental assistant. This kind of goes hand in hand a little, well, not really, but rental assistance programs. We've got some pretty stark statistics there. We're a severely rent overburdened district. And that actually, the last statistic I saw on that, it's increased even more, which makes sense, right? Given the economic times that we're in. We're also severely overcrowded, and so I'm just looking, nearly 35% of renters in our district pay over 50% of their household income on monthly rent. That surely has gone up this year too. So I'll maintain that and as a high priority.
I like that as a high priority. I would put it above the one before it. We know that when people are on the street, they are very resistant to any kind of help. So recommending putting money into programs that keep people from being homeless, I think is a very high priority, or should be a high priority.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Sean, question to piggyback off of what Glenn's comment about preventative services, right, and the quality of services. I'm also wondering too, we have the building that was built on the corner of Caton and, Flatbush. We have that immensely high rise, I think over on Lenox, I forget. And basically my question is this the place where we ask for some sort of impact in terms of what these buildings do to the infrastructure, right? Because I know, for example, in Gowanus, there's that whole conversation with the rezoning, and they're asking for studies on the impact of the proposed buildings to the overflow and whatnot, right? And so I'm just wondering, as we see more and more buildings, be built in our community board, and we also have the rent overburden, is there a way to see not only the economic impact, but also the structural impact?
Well, I don't know exactly, Carl, because usually when a building, it's usually the onus is on the developer to fund the environmental impact statement. So I don't know what public funding we would request in order to incentivize or require an environmental impact study for, I'm not sure how that ties in to rent burdens.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I'll think about it more, and if you think about where it fits in more neatly, and there's something that should be provided in the public realm, we can add it in. But for the most part,
let me think about that more, and I'll get back to you.
do their own environmental impact studies.
Sure.
And the whole thing with the Gowanus is because they're rezoning the entire area. And so they're looking at the impact of what they would rezone it to and what the environmental impact of adding residents to a former manufacturing district would be. So that's why the city is taking that one on, because it informs how they rezone.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'll think about that more and I'll get back to you.
Okay. Summer Youth Employment Program, they did get DYCD received a lot of additional funding. And so we might move this to continued support, or we can keep it, we can keep it as a priority. But this is something that did get a response, a positive response.
I think we should keep it. I think we should start moving towards, instead of a summer youth employment program, that we start talking about year-round youth employment program. And suggest that in some way, even though it currently has the name Summer Youth Employment Program, that we really start getting them to think that this needs to be a year-round thing.
Yeah, I think some of their other programs, like the Bridge program, I can't remember the names of those
Yeah,
programs.
they're, if I can just,
Please, Dwayne.
tack on there. I think we should just, to Joanne's point, I think we should change that from provide and expand or enhance the summer youth employment program to the Workforce Connect programs.
Okay.
That will encompass all of the programs that they have running year round. I would love to see us put in some language there about them making or expanding their efforts to actually advertise those programs to the local schools and parent programs or youth support programs. Because I think that's a major deficiency that the DYCD does have, is that if you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't. And they've got a lot of, as Joanne points out, they have they have 6 or 7 programs that run outside of SYP that run year round.
Dwayne, if I might ask, who were these programs targeting? These people not in school?
Most of the programs target youth between the ages of 16 and 24.
Youth that are not in school?
Some target youth that are, most target youth that are in school. Some target youth that are, for whatever reason, diverted out of the normal path of to achieve their academic goal. But there are programs for youth that are out of school, youth that are in school, youth that are in between school, youth that want to take on different vocations. So there are a couple of programs that cover all bases. And to the point that you're asking the question is my point, that it's not being the information about these programs is not being disseminated enough or broadly enough by DYCD. So,
But that raises, because Glenn is only slightly out of the target audience, so he should know. But it's something Joanne and I have been talking about, and it's been on my mind through a lot of the budget consultations, is an idea of doing a sort of mini roundtable that focuses on some of the programming for youth and brings together the work that the city is doing and that like the precinct is doing with the violence disruptors. And there's so many agencies that, like DYCD has programs that would be pertinent. ACS, we'll get to ACS in a little while, has programs for through their juvenile justice program. HRA has programs that are specific to youth. And so just making sure that our community-based organizations and all of our city agencies serving youth and sort of the new introduction of the violence disruptors into the social fabric, I think it would be really useful just to sort of bring that together and network it all, the way we did for the very first nonprofit roundtable. So we haven't made the nonprofit roundtable so themed, so this would be kind of more of a themed one, and we'd pick out for whom it's relevant and then do a general one later. But I'm thinking about this as we're going through these things, and it kind of goes to Nikki's earlier point too, of like trying to weave a thread through, why these are all important and how they interrelate and how it serves, how working together through these different agencies and getting different, having different budget priorities through the various agencies sort of come together to support, the needs of this district. Sorry, I got long-winded again.
No, that's okay. I agree with you. I think it's a good plan. I'm happy to sit and discuss it with Nikki and the rest of the youth service committee to see how we can help, expound on that idea. But I think we do need to focus our efforts, for the most part, on DYCD because they have the largest catchment of programs that can impact our youth most directly.
And they have a ballooning in this time
Yeah.
not this doesn't happen for all agencies. Their budget is actually ballooning, so we'll help them target where that money goes. And it is getting late. I just noticed the time, so I'll try to move through. This kind of is related. The other ACS, we had other foster care and child welfare requests. So this was a long conversation at budget consultations with the Division of Youth and Family Justice, and that's who has a number of violence disruptor programs, such as through their family justice detention and close home sites, Man Up, Life Camp, True to Life. There's a whole bunch of them. And a lot of those programs I hadn't heard of before. And that's sort of what sparked this idea. So let's tie the DYCD stuff to the ACS programming and make sure that our community-based organizations have that information and those resources. Going from the young to the older, the increased staffing for homebound adult programs, I think is still something, when we submitted this last year, DFTA said they had very limited or no funding for this purpose, which was, how could that even be when our senior centers were closed? So I've been speaking to Cherise Lawrence at DFTA, and she always trumpets the Aging Connect program, which brings older adults into contact with the programs they provide. But I think that we need to. This is another one where I go off on not being able to prioritize one program over another, because whatever program an older adult needs is the one that's most important, to that person, and that shouldn't be in competition with the other program that another older adult needs. So I try to finesse not putting those into order. Anything on that?
If I may, just in understanding that, our older adults have been probably if not more impacted, because their resources have been kind of taken away during the pandemic. All their, all the senior centers, all those things have been closed. I don't know how we emphasize, but I think we should emphasize in there, maybe some additional virtual support, what resources can be allocated to it, from DFTA.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
The agency was reaching out to all of the senior center staff were in frequent contact with their members. So there was a lot of outreach and engagement that way. And then they did programs through the Brooklyn Public Library as well. And so they did a very impressive creative pivot. But the ongoing support for that and ensuring that those sort of recreational needs then, in some cases turned into more social service needs. And so how they then had to pivot from that pivot is something we can figure out what the funding mechanism is and make sure that we're supporting it.
Dawn, can I ask a question regarding that?
Please.
So the senior centers, I mean, obviously the recreation and the social engagement is very, very important. But the other part of that is that many of the people who go to these services also get at least one meal while they're there.
Yeah.
Have other things like some, a certain amount of, healthcare support, blood pressure checks, other kinds of things to make sure that they're doing okay. and so forth. And so I'm just wondering how that was maintained for people who were then no longer able to access these centers and were, you know, stuck at home and maybe couldn't shop for themselves and so forth.
Yeah, I don't know about the medical. I know that the meals those were delivered.
Okay.
So those who were, so there was a whole meal delivery service through DIFTA. But the medical, the checkup, the things that you do when you go to the senior center just because it's being offered that day that you might not proactively seek, that I don't know. And I'll ask Sharice about that. I think we're going to have DIFTA, we're going to try to have DIFTA come into a November Human Service Committee meeting. It's not pinned down yet, but that's the hope.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yep. Oh, so moving on, unless anyone else is jumping in. Moving on to this EDC and SBS request for the King's Theater. I might drop this out. There was a time when the people who managed the King's Theater wanted to develop that little the kind of lot that's next to them. That's also the city property, and they wanted to expand it, but they haven't been interested in doing that recently. And I know they use the space for doing events like, I think Lauren Collins, the Flatbush Business Improvement District Thanksgiving event takes place in tented space on that lot. But it's not something that they're pursuing any longer, so I might just take it out.
So when you say commercial district revitalization requests, so what I'm about to say is probably service request oriented, but I heard recently that the executive director of the King's Theater quit, and that she quit because of the conditions surrounding the theater. And a lot of that has to do with service request, but maybe we can think about revitalization in a different way, because what I was told is that the executive director just felt like it was a losing battle dealing with what was going around the theater. And then in terms of the building across the street, which was once the hotel, and now it's an hourly hotel, and the Astoria building, which is being developed, and it's unknown how that's going to be developed, but it's being developed by the same people who own the hotel across the street. So this is what I heard. So I'm only bringing this up that I think it's going to be important for us to continue to support these cultural institutions. And clearly it's a service request issue, but maybe we just need to rethink what revitalization means.
Yeah, maybe we can request a meeting with SBS and EDC. I mean, it says this, that the King's Theater was an EDC project that was meant to anchor economic development in that area. And then, you know, I think we made that argument when we said that Community Board 14 certainly wasn't opposed to taking our turn of hosting a homeless shelter, but to put it adjacent to supportive housing and literally on the loading dock of the theater just wasn't the location. It's like the city is fighting with itself in terms of, you know, and making investments in economic development and then not supporting it through the next measure and the next measure. So I don't know that that's a budget request that we're making, but more of a policy exploration we need to take with the relevant agencies. And maybe we do that town hall style and try to figure out what the city has planned for supporting the economic catalyst that the theater is supposed to be.
Okay, yes, let's definitely circle back on this, because I was really concerned when I heard all of this information.
The other thing that I did put into this ask that I think it was sort of a losing battle was trying to fix, so when the mayor's office of media and entertainment issue a permit to a film or commercial, a film shoot, we get notified, but we don't get asked, we don't have any approval or say in it. But we do get told when we call them and we're complaining about something specific about a particular shoot, we get told that, to give them a call and they'll make a contribution to something. And I hate naming that because I don't want it to look like we're trading off our right to complain about how they're conducting themselves for a contribution. So I thought if there was just sort of this automatic thing that they had to do, so nobody has to go shake them down in order to then, put up with inhospitable behavior. That sort of was the idea there, but nobody in the city has ever taken a bite of that apple, and there might be a better way of going about it than making it a budget request. So I'm going to scratch it.
Hey, Sean, this is Greg.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah, so a question on that. I mean, in terms of the money that, that does come in, is there any sort of allocation of where it goes, or is it just kind of goes into the coffers?
Well, I mean, they've offered it to the community board before, and we don't have a mechanism for accepting it, and I'm not comfortable if we did, but usually what it is like the neighborhood associations, for instance, because they do a lot of filming in, say, Ditmas Park. So the Ditmas Park Neighborhood Association gets a contribution from them. I think they've been pointed toward parks before to fund a cleanup. What's another one? Lauren Collins from the Flatbush and Church Avenue bids will go shake them down. I mean, I shouldn't say shake them down, but the bid will accept contributions when they're shooting in the bid. So it's not that's kind of where I was going with this, is like, it shouldn't be catch as catch can, and who has the sort of the nerve to walk out and tell them that they would like a contribution for the inconvenience they're causing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me, I mean, if there is, a concomitant, amount of work that, say, the community board office has to shoulder, for shoots and, dress issues and that sort of thing, I mean, there would seem to be a direct connection, but, again, I'm not sure what the mechanism would be to make that happen otherwise, aside from the shakedown you're proposing.
The way other community boards do it is they have a Friends of, so there's a Friends of Community Board 6 in Park Slope, and then that's an entity that could accept those, those contributions. But then there's a conversation, and maybe we should punt this for another, an executive committee or another budget committee conversation about whether or not it's time Community Board 14 do it. If we decide no, that's fine, but sometimes deciding no versus just sort of riding along with the way things are two different things. So I'd be happy to have that conversation and talk to colleagues that have the Friends of Community Board blank, and ask them how they use it, and just think about it.
Yeah, it may be worth it, just simply because the number of shoots in the district is quite high. So it might be worth it.
Okay.
In our neighborhood, our treasurer for the Beverly Square West Association would go talk to them whenever they were shooting in our area, and they would usually give them like $500 or something like that. So it wasn't a difficult thing. It was just somebody had to go find the person who had the purse strings and talk to him.
Yeah.
Just a time check. We have about like 12 minutes to finish up the next few pages.
And we should get through them pretty quickly because I think most of them are no-brainers, but I want to just point out to Florencia and just note that this is down here at priority 12, and I think this should be pushed up. But it's create or promote programs to destigmatize mental health needs and encourage treatment. And, we should push street outreach with this. And, it explains most of our homeless population. Is there anything there? I'll move it up in the priority. Funding for a new senior program. I mean, that's all. That would all be contingent upon an RFP and a community, like the Department for the Aging doesn't go and open up programs. They let an RFP and then community-based organizations decide that they're going to respond to it, and then they get the funding to do it. So not only would DFTA have to have the funding, but then an agency or an organization such as FDC would want to go for it. And then they would make the application, and then they would be chosen, and then we would have another senior program. So I don't know if asking for more funding actually gets us there, but I do just want to keep a bookmark in this spot to, to signify support for having yet another senior center, because we don't have that many here.
Maybe that the next nonprofit roundtable, this should be a subject to be brought up to see if there's an existing agency that might be willing to do something like this.
Yeah, I know FDC is interested in doing it, and Canva maybe too, but yeah, I think, doing that, that's a great idea. And it would be even better if there was an RFP. Like, I think if DFTA if they were gonna let a new one, then that would be another time to sort of like circle the wagons and see if somebody could go for it so that we could bring it home.
But in the meantime, we could find out if there are any agencies interested, and then if an RFP is, sent out, then could push them or inform them or whatever.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll even do it before our next nonprofit roundtable. If we have DFTA coming to visit us for a Human Service Committee meeting next week, let's try to get some of our community-based organization directors on that, on that meeting to discuss it. Just moving on in the interest of time, though, we've this budget request from DEP. This was during COVID, and it was something that they were doing, and they asked for support. I'm going to find out from DEP if they are continuing to develop with DOHMH the wastewater testing sites, which they were using potentially to identify public health threats. And if that is a program that's ongoing, I see no reason to not support it. The water main, so priority 15 is a no-brainer, supporting our libraries and their programs, but 16, I want to move this up, and I want to emphasize, and thank you, Anya, for being so good at like scrolling through this as I talk. I appreciate you keeping up, but I want to increase the importance of DEP taking a look at our flooding sites. This is one of the ones, Nicole, where is further study by the agency is requested. It's like we give you these flooding locations endlessly, so you don't need to study them more. Forestry services and our street tree maintenance, I still want to keep that on there because we get lots of calls about hanging branches. And when big storms come, that is my number one worry, is what's going to happen and what damage is going to be caused by falling tree branches in our district. I'm going to go through these really quickly now, so just jump in there if I'm going too fast. Building inspectors, Department of Buildings, like we were talking about HPD inspectors not being that well organized in how they approach. The Department of Buildings will go to a location once and they will say we weren't able to gain access, so they'll go back a second time, and then they'll say we weren't able to gain access, and they close out the complaint. You have to re-enter it into a 311 system. That's not a good way to get things done. And they did increase building inspectors last year, but they admitted that they could use even more. So we'll maintain that in our requests. The next one is, rats and mosquito populations. Maybe I'll move that one up too, because rat complaints are very, 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 very much on the increase. And then FD&Y headcount is something that we will continue to support because FD&Y is not at full complement. They do not have as many firefighters as they are allowed to have. I forget what the word is, but they're understaffed, which is not to say that there aren't, how they make up for that is with overtime. So they always have an adequate number of firefighters in the firehouse, but they're patching it together through overtime instead of straight time. And I think they have to graduate something like 6 more classes and then hope that all, the critical mass of their graduates become probies and then pass their probation period. And if that works out, in 6 classes, they'll be at full complement, but that's a few years from now. We talked about, so this next priority is with Department of Sanitation, and this is for little stuff. I mean, this says provide more frequent litter basket collections. That must be because the drop down didn't let me do something unique, but this was really a request to get weed whackers and bolt cutters and pruning shears into the hands of our sanitation workers. That's another thing MLP would do. Right now, our cleaning supervisor has to request a weed whacker, to borrow a weed whacker from Brooklyn South and then get it delivered and then return it, and that's silly. They should have their own weed whacker. It's not that big of a deal. And bolt cutters too. We get a lot of abandoned bike calls. Oh, and then here's a couple more swipes at getting Newkirk Plaza programmed properly. So we asked EDC to issue an RFP for Newkirk Plaza the way they did for, back in the day. That's what they did for the King's Theater, and more recently, this is what they've done for the publicly owned land at Church in Bedford. They said that securing funding is outside of their jurisdiction. But again, I think that's just because they're going to the drop-down answers that their agency has available to them instead of actually reading and thinking about it. Because I did speak to Ricky DaCosta when he was at EDC, and he thought it was an interesting idea that he was going to explore, but then he moved on from the agency. We could also ask the Transit Authority to maintain the plaza. They keep saying it's not theirs, but I would prefer it to be DOT's anyway, but in case anybody ever says it is theirs, let's keep that as a placeholder. And then we're at our last 2, which are increased enforcement of canine waste laws, because we get that complaint a lot. And I might sort of tease that out so it's a more general increased funding for sanitation enforcement. And then the assigning additional crossing guards is, I think, we could always, all commanding officers say that if they had more crossing guards, they'd put them at more corners. And that's a high priority in a lot of other districts. And so we keep that in there to be supportive of our neighboring community districts, and because it wouldn't hurt to have more. Any comment on anything that should be moved drastically that I didn't say we would move, or anything that's glaringly missing or shouldn't be on here?
No, but Sean, I just wanted to say you made a comment earlier I think to Glenn about like using this as a way to help committees really prioritize their work. And I really think that's super cool. And I think pre-pandemic, I've sat in on this meeting voluntarily and found it very helpful. But now thinking about it through that lens, it's almost like objectives and key results for committee work is actually really interesting. And for my own committee makes me think. So please do follow up on that. I think that's a very good suggestion and a cool idea.
Yeah, we could just keep it on all committee agendas under, like where we have new business, just like have budget talk. Michelle, you had a hand up?
Good evening.
Hi.
Number 25, the last thing you touched on about the crossing guards.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that could be moved up as well? Because that's something that they could do without a whole lot of really searching for money. It's more about assigning personnel.
Yeah, and if anybody has any specific locations, if you would email them to the info at email address so that we can add that to the ask and specify. The problem here isn't necessarily budget, although keeping it in as a budget item isn't a bad idea. That or maybe it is a budget in the long run, but there aren't enough people applying for the job. So even when they open up the application process, we're being told that not enough people apply. So maybe that's a matter, maybe it is a budget item because maybe they have to increase pay or something like that. But there is a problem filling even the slots they have open and available to them now.
So if we find out whether it's open, if it's an open position, or is it something that they have cut off positions, you know, from this period to that period to apply? Or is it one that stays open because
No,
they
it's
don't get
rolling.
enough people to apply? I
I
mean,
believe it's
I
rolling.
can find out how it works, but if we leave that as the last thing, when that's really not really something that they have to do, jump through too many hoops in order to get approval for funding for, it's just a matter of moving monies around. Maybe we could get some more bodies into the community.
I'll move it up in the budget priority, and I will reach out to Brooklyn South, to the chief, and I'll work with the CO just to see how many we have now, whether it's increased, but if we have specific locations that we're asking for them for, that would be helpful.
That would help. Okay, great. I'll get back to you on that. Thank you.
Great. And anybody else too, if you see a corner that you think would benefit from a crossing guard, let me know.
What's the criteria for getting a crossing guard?
Proximity to a school, but I don't know how far away it has to be. It's like within 2 blocks or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, Sean, thank you so much for going through this and giving us all the insight and explaining the thought process and all of the hard work that you put each and every year in this. Thank you.
I'll share that with Anya, who puts the work into on all of the service delivery that informs these.
Thank you, Anya, for all of your hard work in the service delivery. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we'll see you Monday for the general meeting. Don't forget to look at the bylaw revisions. Have a great night. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Thank you.
All right.